Alright, I'm Rich Bykowski. I'm a pre-doc in paleobiology from Indiana University, and pretty happy today to be able to come here and talk to you guys on the second to last day I'm going to be at the Smithsonian about some of my dissertation research. And part of it kind of starts with a preface that in the last 10 years we've seen a lot of interest, renewed interest in understanding dinosaur growth and ontogeny, specifically in terms of documenting some of the extreme changes that many of these animals underwent as they grew. And this dovetails nicely into some of my research questions because I'm interested in theropod dinosaurs, so carnivorous dinosaurs like the one you just saw in the previous talk, maybe even some of the big guys like T-Rex, and kind of how they parsed up the landscape. What were they doing? What niches were they filling? And when we see kind of pastoral scenes like this, the thing that always struck me is, yeah, there's a lot of adult dinosaurs on there, but what were the babies doing? And given some of the extreme changes in ontogeny that we've seen, it kind of begs the question, why might ecology vary with ontogeny? And we can make a couple of predictions in that if there is significant variation in theropod morphology associated with prey capture, resource acquisition, such as the jaws, the teeth, the limbs, etc., and these vary as the animal is growing, then maybe we can start to speculate that some of these juveniles were exploiting different predatory ecologies than their parents. And maybe in some cases, they were competing with other species or other adult species, so they're not competing directly with their parents for resources. But the opposite might be true, that if morphology is not really significantly different, then they might be exploiting the same niches, or there might be some other governing factors that are allowing the juveniles and the adults to coexist on the landscape. So in this particular project, I looked at two different data sets, the second of which is this Tyrannosaur data set, which I won't be talking about, but if you have questions about it, I'm happy to answer them. But I'm going to focus on this late Jurassic data set from the Morrison Formation for two reasons. One, because we found representatives of these different taxa from that formation, so they were likely inhabiting the same ecosystem. And two, the allosaurs, which is the focus of this particular section, we basically got a little population from the Cleveland Lloyd Quarry, so we've got a good range of size from some small ones to some big ones. And the methods looked at three different components. I looked at geometric morphometrics of the maxilla to kind of get a handle on skull shape. I looked at some dental variation, kind of quick and dirty, determine was the tooth very, very robust and spike-like, or was it very narrow and blade-like? And then I tried to quantify the running ability by looking at the portions of the major limb bones, the femur, tibia, and the metatarsal. And initially, the results were skull morphology, and to kind of orient you, I've highlighted allosaur morphospace in the colors, numbers or size body classes, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, increasing letters of the non-allosaur taxa. And in terms of the size classes, shape in the maxilla within the allosaurs were not different between the adults and the juveniles. And even if we see below, there was no scaling relationship between skull shape and skull size. To give you an idea, the smallest individual I had a skull about this big, the biggest one maybe about like that. So while I don't have a neonate per se, I still wouldn't want to run into a little guy who'd probably be able to take you out and make a meal of you. And then what was also really shocking was allosaurs versus non-allosaurs were not different very much in terms of shape. So skull morphology, at least between allosaurus juveniles and allosaurus adults, really seems to be conserved through growth. Dental variation also seems to be conserved through growth, at least using this one quick metric that I employed. And if we look kind of on the bottom left, we see those 2, 3, 4, 5 in red. Those are the allosaur specimens. They all kind of plot this together. But they're specifically different from the other species. So Allosaurus is different from the Ceratosaurus in blue, from the Marchosaurus, Botanicoglyris, and the Torvosaurus. So dental variation seems to be very, very tied to a particular species or taxon. And kind of lastly, I looked at limb morphology. And the way to kind of read this plot is if you're up in the cursorial range in the upper right in the red, you're really well adapted for running. If you're kind of down in the purple in the graviportal, you're more adapted for bearing weight and just kind of holding yourself up. So down there is more like an elephant, up at the top it's more like an ostrich. And we actually saw, or actually found, significant differences in terms of body size and age structure. So we've got this ontogenetic trajectory almost, where you got some small allosauruses and some of the smaller theropods plotting among the relatively better runners relative to some of their bigger contemporaries. So we've got the 2 is actually one of the younger allosauruses that's kind of up there, and then you've got the 4 or 5 at the bottom. So in general, while the skull morphology and dentition is really pretty much the same as they were growing, the changes in limb morphology suggest that selection might have been favoring higher juvenile performance, giving them some sort of an advantage, maybe in running to kind of help them keep up with the adults and acquire resources. So it's variable, but there seems to be some sort of a signal. With that, I'd like to thank the following institutions for specimens, funding agencies, faculty and staff at IU, for especially my dissertation committee, and faculty and the staff here for Goodyear, and I guess I've got time for a question. Thank you. Yeah.
With a slight change in body plan from elephant to what was it, emu or something like that, would you expect juveniles to be eating the same things that their parents were?
Okay, so the question was, would I expect the juveniles to be eating the same thing as their parents based on body size, correct?
Well, yeah, the changing.
The changes. Probably not, but the other kind of implication of some of this is if they weren't directly competing with the adults, maybe the adults were bringing food to them so they weren't having to go out and get it themselves up to a certain point. Again, I don't have a particularly hatchling or a little one. The smallest one I got is about like that, and even that was somewhat of a formidable, would have been able to take something out about our size. So, possibly.